Friends, if you are excited to watch one of the most anticipated and action-packed movies of the year, Primitive War 2025, in English, then you are in the perfect place. If you are visiting our channel for the very first time, make sure to subscribe because today's video is going to be full of information, excitement, and a lot of fun details about this highly awaited film. In today's video, we are going to explore everything about Primitive War 2025, from what this movie is all about to where and how you can watch it. We'll cover every single interesting detail, hidden fact, and exclusive insight that you won't want to miss. We'll talk about the complete release strategy of Primitive War 2025, including on which OTT platform this film is expected to arrive, when it will premiere in theaters, and whether it will also be available on any satellite channels for television audiences. We'll explore the production journey of the movie, taking you behind the scenes into the world of pre-production planning, location scouting, intense filming schedules, and the high-end post-production work that has gone into creating a truly thrilling cinematic experience. We'll also dive into the technical department to discuss the movie's visual effects, sound design, and cinematography, as well as the music department to see how the score and soundtrack elevate the entire tone of the film. Of course, no movie discussion is complete without talking about the budget and box office expectations, and Primitive War 2025 is no exception. We will give you insights into the scale of investment, the production costs, and the industry buzz around how much this movie could earn once it hits the big screens. Alongside this, we will explore the gripping storyline of Primitive War 2025, giving you a brief review and a spoiler-free peek into what makes this plot so unique and exciting. Expect intense action sequences, nail-biting suspense, and powerful character arcs that promise to keep audiences hooked from start to finish. We'll also discuss the star-studded cast of the movie, introducing you to the actors, their roles, and how they bring their characters to life. We'll break down the performances, talk about which actor is playing which character, and analyze how their chemistry on screen adds to the overall impact of the story. Beyond that, we'll reveal some fascinating behind-the-scenes facts, fun trivia, and secrets about the making of the movie that will make you appreciate it even more when you finally watch it. Friends, this video will be your one-stop destination for everything you need to know about Primitive War 2025. So, I request you to stay with us till the very end, because you're going to get a complete picture of this highly awaited cinematic experience. From the film's production journey to its storyline, cast, technical brilliance, music, budget, and where to watch it, we're going to cover it all in detail. So, grab your popcorn, sit back, and let's dive deep into the exciting world of Primitive War 2025. Now, let's start the video. Primitive War unfolds like a straight-shot men-on-a-mission war picture that's been spliced with a creature feature, sticking to a largely linear timeline anchored to the perspective of an elite recon team called Vulture Squad during the Vietnam War in 1968. The opening establishes their competence under fire and the grim mood of the jungle before command drops the inciting order. Track a missing Green Beret platoon that vanished inside a cordon valley with no air support and a radio blackout, a setup that immediately frames the central mystery and isolates the squad so the jungle itself can become a character. And once boots hit the mud, the narrative starts ticking forward in chapters marked by waypoints, river crossings, ravines, ruined outposts, each new leg punctuated by evidence that something non-human is hunting here. First as spore and shredded gear, and then as a full-bore ambush that flips the film from war thriller to survival horror. That first encounter is a major turning point because it redefines the enemy and resets the squad's tactics from search and rescue to stay alive and adapt, and the script leans into military procedure, perimeter checks, staggered formations, radio brevity, to heighten the tension as they realize their rifles aren't the top of the food chain anymore. While the second act complicates the mission with the reveal that the valley is the fallout of a clandestine de-extinction experiment tied to Cold War adversaries, with the dinosaurs not a supernatural anomaly, but the brutal, unintended consequence of hubristic science and geopolitics, a discovery that reframes the soldiers' moral calculus from bring our boys home to contain an ecological catastrophe before it spreads, and introduces a knowledge source who can point them toward the heart of the facility and the kill switch that might stop the outbreak. Thematically, it's where the film sharpens its bite, mirroring the chaos of war with the amoral logic of apex predators and asking how much humanity the squad can retain when survival demands they become as ruthless as the jungle. A beat the story underlines through escalating losses, fraying discipline, and terse arguments over whether to complete the extraction or scorch the evidence, all while the jungle keeps closing in. Structurally, the middle is built around attrition set pieces, a nighttime siege at a derelict firebase, a river crossing that turns into a feeding lane, a trek through monsoon rain where muzzle flashes briefly sketch enormous silhouettes, each set piece winnowing the roster and pushing the survivors toward a midpoint choice: retreat and live with what they've seen, or press deeper to end the threat at the source. And their decision to advance is the hinge that drives the back half. The late second act twist arrives when they learn the missing platoon is either dead, turned on each other, or being used as bait within the lab's ruins, raising the emotional stakes and seeding guilt and rage that fuel the final push. And when they reach the facility, the film pivots into a demolition clock climax: charges to plant, a generator to fry, a door to hold, as larger, smarter predators converge, a sequence staged as parallel tracks where one team draws the pack into kill zones while the other races to trigger a shutdown that may or may not work, forcing a sacrificial play that buys a few agonizing minutes and cements the film's fatalistic war movie DNA. The closing movement doesn't tie things in a neat bow so much as let the jungle swallow the evidence. The survivors stumble into extraction with proof burned, bodies lost, and no clean story to report, and the emotional residue is less triumph than tremor. The title's idea of a primitive war has shifted from a catchy pitch to a thesis about how conflict strips people to instinct, how nature is indifferent to flags and causes, and how the line between soldier and beast blurs when the only metric is who gets out alive. And throughout, the momentum is carried by a conventional but sturdy structure: mission brief, first contact, revelation, moral crossroads, facility raid, extraction, spiced with genre jolts and a steady drumbeat of cause and effect that keeps the plot readable even as it keeps raising the immediate cost of each choice the squad makes, with the Vietnam setting and de-extinction twist providing the connective tissue that turns a rescue op into a grim parable about hubris meeting tooth and claw. In Primitive War, the characters aren't just faceless soldiers running through the jungle. They are layered, flawed, and deeply human, and the film treats their journeys as integral to the story rather than background noise to the chaos. The entire narrative hinges on their evolution as individuals and as a team, and the way the movie explores their shifting motivations, fragile alliances, and survival instincts turns what could have been a simple creature feature into an intense character-driven war drama. Set against the brutal backdrop of the Vietnam War in 1968, the members of Vulture Squad enter the story as hardened recon soldiers, trained, disciplined, and seemingly prepared for anything. But as the mission unfolds, as they trek deeper into the Forbidden Valley and encounter horrors far beyond enemy fire, we watch them transform piece by piece, stripped of hierarchy, protocol, and ideals, until what's left are raw, instinct-driven survivors hanging on to whatever humanity they have left. At the center of this transformation is the squad leader, a character whose arc defines much of the emotional weight of the film. At first, he embodies military precision: disciplined, cautious, loyal to his men, and bound by duty above all else. His initial motivation is simple: find the missing platoon, complete the mission, and bring his team home alive. But as they encounter the inexplicable, evidence of slaughter they can't explain, claw marks ripping through steel, half-devoured corpses, the cracks begin to show. He starts facing impossible choices. Does he follow orders or trust his instincts? Does he prioritize the objective or his men? Over time, we watch his calm confidence erode into desperation, guilt, and a quiet, simmering rage, not at his squad, but at the situation, the command that sent them here blind, and the revelation that nature itself has become the enemy. By the climax, the man who once led by strict protocol is making decisions based on gut and survival, showing a complete transformation from soldier to primal protector. Beside him is the second-in-command, a sharp-witted, sardonic realist who hides his anxiety beneath sarcasm and dry humor. Early on, he feels like comic relief, the guy who always has a line ready to cut the tension, but as the situation spirals, he becomes the emotional compass of the team. Where the leader's instinct is to obey and push forward, the second-in-command constantly challenges him, questioning the morality of their orders and the sanity of continuing deeper into the valley. Their dynamic is one of quiet conflict, loyalty clashing with logic, and the friction between them adds a vital undercurrent of tension to the squad's decisions. By the second act, he grows into an unexpected voice of reason, urging the group to reassess what winning this mission even means when their rifles don't matter against creatures designed by evolution to kill. Yet when the time comes, he's the one who makes the hard calls no one else can, often sacrificing his own comfort and safety to keep the team moving forward. Then there's the young recruit, the heart of the team and, arguably, the film's most tragic arc. When we meet him, he's inexperienced, wide-eyed, and eager to prove himself, idolizing his superiors and desperate to earn his place among hardened veterans. His early moments are full of nervous energy, checking his gear twice, scanning every shadow, sticking close to the squad leader like a safety net. But as the body count rises and the squad suffers gruesome losses, we watch his innocence disintegrate in real time. The first time he freezes during an attack, he's paralyzed by fear. The next time, we see him adapt, aiming steady and firing without hesitation. By the third act, he's a different person entirely, his youthful curiosity and naivety stripped away, leaving someone colder, quieter, and deadlier. His arc isn't about triumph, but transformation, and the shift hits hard because the film lets us see every stage of it. The way his posture changes, his voice lowers, his face hardens. Another standout is the radio operator, an introverted, observant presence who spends much of the early film in the background, fiddling with equipment and relaying intel without drawing attention. But as chaos mounts and communication breaks down, he becomes the squad's lifeline, both literally and figuratively. While others are panicking, he's calculating, the kind of soldier who notices the little things, like patterns in attacks or signs of movement others miss. His quiet intelligence and adaptability gradually push him into the foreground, especially when the squad loses external support and he has to improvise ways to stay connected or navigate hostile terrain. As the team fractures under pressure, he also becomes an emotional anchor, the one others confide in during stolen moments of calm, giving the audience glimpses into their fears and regrets. By the finale, his transformation is subtle but powerful. He grows from passive technician to active problem solver, someone whose steady presence literally keeps the survivors alive. Complicating these core arcs is the arrival of the local guide, a character who shifts the story's perspective and injects a layer of cultural and moral conflict. He's not a soldier, but his knowledge of the land, the valley, and its buried secrets make him invaluable to the team. Where the squad views the jungle as an enemy to conquer, he treats it with reverence, warning them of patterns, scents, and signs that carry meanings they can't grasp. His perspective challenges the squad's arrogance and forces them to confront their blind spots, not just about nature, but about their role in the chaos unleashed here. His warnings foreshadow key turning points, and when his fears come true, his frustration becomes heartbreak, creating one of the film's most gut-wrenching emotional beats when his personal loss intertwines with the squad's survival. As the team pushes deeper, relationships shift constantly under pressure. Trust fractures as losses pile up, disagreements over tactics intensify, and unspoken grudges threaten to boil over. A soldier who blames leadership for past failures lashes out during a critical firefight, jeopardizing the group. Another wrestles with guilt after leaving someone behind and later risks everything in a reckless bid for redemption. These arcs overlap and collide, creating a web of personal stakes that make every decision matter more. The film's brilliance lies in showing how trauma doesn't just shape individuals, but reshapes the team's dynamics as a whole. By the third act, Vulture Squad is no longer a polished recon unit. It's a scattered collection of survivors bound not by orders, but by necessity, stripped down to instinct and mutual dependence. By the time the climactic raid on the abandoned lab facility begins, no one is the same person they were at the start. Hierarchies are gone, morality is blurred, and every soldier has been rewritten by the jungle's relentless lessons. Even in their quietest moments, sharing water before a storm, adjusting gear with trembling hands, whispering memories of home, the emotional weight of what they've endured lingers. Some characters are driven harder into survival mode, becoming more ruthless and feral, while others cling to their last shreds of humanity even when it puts them in danger. Every death carries the weight of relationships we've seen evolve, making the losses more painful and the sacrifices more meaningful. The performances in Primitive War are the heartbeat of the film, the human anchor that grounds a high-concept premise filled with chaos, blood, and survival into something deeply believable and emotionally engaging. Without this cast fully committing to their roles, the movie could have easily slipped into shallow spectacle, but the actors breathe life into their characters with such intensity and precision that every scream, silence, glance, and breakdown carries weight. Each member of Vulture Squad feels like a real person with a personal history, inner conflicts, and layered motivations, and the performances ensure you're invested not just in who survives, but how survival changes them. Starting with the squad leader, his performance sets the tone for the entire film. From his very first scene, there's a gravity to his presence, a quiet authority in the way he walks, checks his weapon, and commands his men. But what makes his portrayal so compelling isn't the bravado, it's the restraint. He doesn't need loud speeches to show leadership. Instead, we get subtle micro-expressions, slight pauses before giving orders, and softening in his voice during moments of doubt. You can almost see his internal battle, trying to balance duty with humanity, as his eyes betray flashes of fear and frustration even when his words remain composed. By the time the film reaches its second act and the reality of their situation sets in, we witness his transformation piece by piece. The actor allows the tension to simmer beneath the surface until it finally erupts in raw, unfiltered emotion during a pivotal moment where he must choose between following orders and protecting his men. It's a masterclass in understated power, making his arc feel both heroic and heartbreakingly human. The second-in-command delivers one of the film's most emotionally complex performances, elevating the tension between duty and morality. At first, he's the sarcastic one, the voice of reason hiding behind humor, tossing sharp one-liners to lighten the oppressive atmosphere. But as the situation escalates and the mission spirals into chaos, his demeanor changes in layers rather than in leaps. The humor fades, replaced by a sharp-edged intensity and simmering frustration, especially during his confrontations with the leader. Their relationship becomes one of the narrative's strongest anchors. Their arguments feel authentic, charged with mutual respect yet undercut by growing ideological differences. The actor navigates this beautifully, playing a man whose confidence masks deep vulnerability. He gradually emerges as the squad's conscience, questioning not just their tactics but their very purpose, and his ability to shift between defiance, loyalty, and quiet moments of fear makes his performance magnetic. The young recruit steals some of the most emotionally devastating moments in the movie with a performance that evolves from innocence to quiet devastation. In the beginning, his body language tells the entire story: nervous shuffling, darting glances, fumbling with gear, and a hesitant voice betraying his eagerness to prove himself. He idolizes the veterans around him, hanging on their words, copying their stances, wanting to belong. But as the jungle begins to strip away his naivety, the actor sells this transformation not through melodrama but through subtle, painful details. His voice drops lower, his gaze sharpens, his movements become deliberate rather than uncertain. The first time he's forced to kill, there's a haunting silence in his performance, a moment where he doesn't react outwardly, but you feel the shock ripple through him. By the third act, he's hardened, quieter, and colder, but the actor still allows slivers of the boy he was to shine through in small gestures, a trembling hand when reloading, a stolen glance at a fallen comrade. It's a gut-wrenching journey, made unforgettable by an actor who understands that becoming a survivor comes at a personal cost. The radio operator deserves special recognition for a performance that thrives in restraint. Initially, he fades into the background, quiet, methodical, more focused on his equipment than the squad's banter, But as the team's situation deteriorates and communication becomes critical, he steps into the spotlight without ever shifting his understated tone. The actor leans into small physical details to make the character pop. Precise hand movements when tuning signals, controlled breathing while under fire, and subtle expressions that betray panic even when his voice stays steady. By the time the narrative reaches its most chaotic moments, he's become the team's emotional anchor, offering quiet reassurances and keeping a cool head when others unravel. His performance is understated but essential, giving the audience someone to trust when everything else feels uncertain. Then there's the local guide, whose performance deepens the emotional and cultural texture of the film. From his first appearance, he carries a grounded, unshakable presence that contrasts sharply with the squad's loud, tactical aggression. His movements are deliberate, his eyes constantly scanning, his warnings soft but firm. The actor brings authenticity to the role, portraying someone who understands the jungle intimately, not just its terrain, but its rhythms, its dangers, its history. His frustration when the squad dismisses his advice, his visible grief when his fears come true, and his stoic resilience through loss add a moral weight to the story. One particularly powerful moment comes when he performs a quiet ritual after a devastating attack, and without a single line, his expressions tell you everything you need to know about his connection to the land and the tragedy unfolding within it. His performance balances vulnerability and strength, making him one of the film's most memorable presences. The supporting cast brings additional layers to the film's emotional depth. Engineers, lab survivors, and higher-ups in command, though they appear in fewer scenes, deliver precise, natural performances that add stakes and nuance to the story. A brief, chilling encounter with a scientist who knows exactly what was unleashed is played with understated terror, while an unflinching officer who views the soldiers as expendable pieces of a chess game offers a performance so restrained it borders on cold calculation, making his scenes quietly unforgettable. Even minor roles, those who don't survive long, contribute to the overall emotional weight because the actors commit fully to every scream, panic, and fleeting moment of connection before the story swallows them. What ties all these performances together is physicality. The cast doesn't just act, they inhabit the exhaustion, fear, and grit of their characters. Sweat-streaked faces, mud-caked boots, trembling hands reloading rifles, the hitch of breath in silence before a predator attacks. All of these grounded, physical choices make the high-stakes premise believable. Equally powerful are the moments of silence. The director and actors embrace quiet beats between action sequences, letting small looks, gestures, and pauses carry immense emotional weight. A shared glance before entering hostile terrain, a trembling hand on a comrade's shoulder, a muttered memory of home. All of these understated interactions deepen our investment in the squad. By the time major deaths occur, they hit like gut punches because the performances have made the relationships real. These aren't just names on a roster, they're people we've come to know. The direction in Primitive War is the invisible force that drives everything, shaping not just what you see but how you experience it. This isn't a film where the director sits back and lets the story unfold on autopilot. Every shot, every sound, every moment of silence feels carefully chosen to pull you deeper into the oppressive, unpredictable world of the movie. The director approaches this film with the precision of a tactician but the vision of an artist, merging two genres that often clash, gritty Vietnam War realism and survival horror spectacle, and turning them into a seamless, immersive experience. It's not just about watching soldiers fight dinosaurs. It's about feeling what it means to be trapped in an alien jungle where nature itself has reclaimed dominance, where every rustle in the leaves might be the end of someone's story, and where human control becomes increasingly meaningless. From the very first frame, the director sets the tone with deliberate control of mood and atmosphere. The opening doesn't begin with chaos or explosions. Instead, it drops us into the quiet tension of the squad's world, boots crunching on damp earth, radios crackling softly, the whine of cicadas undercutting whispered commands. Before the first creature even appears, the audience already senses the danger, and that's intentional. The director uses restraint as a weapon, letting our anticipation build naturally. This calculated slow burn approach allows the tension to simmer before it boils, making the eventual bursts of violence more shocking and visceral. One of the most remarkable aspects of the direction is the use of shot composition to tell the story without words. The director constantly plays with space, framing, and focus to manipulate what we feel in each moment. In early scenes, when the squad is unified and confident, wide symmetrical shots dominate the screen, emphasizing order and control. As the situation spirals and the jungle begins to close in, the camera shifts, frames get tighter, compositions tilt subtly off-center, and handheld shots replace the steadiness of earlier sequences. This gradual visual shift mirrors the psychological unraveling of the characters. The camera becomes an extension of the squad's mental state. When they're calm, it breathes. When panic sets in, it shakes, compresses, and disorients, making us feel trapped alongside them. Lighting and color grading also play a massive role in setting the tone. The jungle isn't just a backdrop. Under the director's vision, it becomes a living, breathing character, oppressive, humid, and relentless. Natural greens and earthy tones dominate the palette early on, but they're deliberately muted, drained of warmth, creating a sense of decay and danger lurking beneath the surface. As the squad pushes deeper into forbidden territory, the visuals shift subtly. Deeper shadows consume the frame, contrasts sharpen, and warm colors creep in during moments of bloodshed, blending nature's beauty with its brutality. When the narrative transitions into the abandoned facility in the third act, the palette fractures again. Clinical blues, harsh whites, and sickly fluorescence replace the organic tones, visually underscoring the shift from primal chaos to the artificial horrors of human experimentation. It's a deliberate aesthetic evolution that matches the film's emotional rhythm. The pacing is another area where the director demonstrates remarkable control. Primitive War isn't relentless chaos from start to finish. Instead, it flows like a heartbeat, alternating between tension-building calm and sudden bursts of chaos. Quiet moments are stretched just long enough to make you uneasy, while action sequences hit like a sledgehammer, intense but never overindulgent. A nighttime siege at a derelict firebase, for example, starts in near total silence, just distant thunder, a bead of sweat rolling down a soldier's temple, before erupting into an orchestrated storm of chaos when the creatures attack. The contrast between silence and noise, stillness and motion, makes these sequences not just thrilling but terrifying. The director understands that horror lives in anticipation, not just in spectacle, and every set piece is structured around that idea. One of the boldest stylistic choices is the handling of the creatures themselves. Instead of constantly throwing them into full view, the director opts for restraint, keeping much of the terror just out of frame. Shadows move between trees. A tail brushes the edge of the shot. A guttural growl echoes through the foliage with no source in sight. These small, teasing glimpses let the audience's imagination do the work, making the creatures feel far more menacing than if they were constantly front and center. When we do finally get prolonged looks at them, it's earned. The reveals carry impact because tension has been layered so carefully. Practical effects, animatronics, and real set interaction enhance this even further, allowing actors to physically respond to something tangible, making every scream, stumble, and breathless retreat far more authentic than pure CGI spectacle would allow. Sound design, under the director's guidance, becomes a critical storytelling tool. Instead of relying heavily on a constant score, he creates entire stretches where natural sounds dominate, dripping water, snapping branches, a single breath trembling beneath jungle noise. When the score does enter, it's purposeful, swelling in moments of loss, layering tension in stalking sequences, or cutting abruptly to silence right before an attack to sharpen its impact. That restraint gives the soundscape an organic quality that mirrors the primal environment, making us feel immersed rather than manipulated. Performance direction is another area where the filmmaker's hand is clear but invisible. Rather than forcing overt emotional beats, the director lets the actors inhabit their characters naturally, allowing improvisation in small interactions while anchoring them tightly to the larger thematic vision. Squad banter feels real, overlapping and unpolished, creating the sense that these people have trained, eaten, and fought together long before the film began. During scenes of terror, the director resists melodrama, letting quiet expressions, locked jaws, shallow breathing, and a single glance exchanged between soldiers carry more emotional weight than shouting ever could. It's clear that rehearsals were extensive, as the ensemble functions like a living organism. When one member falters, the others instinctively adapt, reflecting the trained instincts of a seasoned recon unit. Perhaps the most impressive achievement of the direction is how seamlessly the film blends tone and genre. It starts like a war movie, boots on the ground, command orders, military jargon, and then slips gradually into survival horror without feeling disjointed. The transition is invisible but deliberate, making the shift from human conflict to primal chaos feel natural, as though we've simply descended into a deeper layer of reality where soldiers, guns, and strategies mean nothing. By the time the film reaches its climactic sequence inside the lab facility, the director unleashes everything: tighter edits, frantic handheld shots, claustrophobic framing, and strobing lights all combine to amplify the chaos. Yet even here, amid explosions and creature attacks, he never loses sight of the human stakes. The cinematography of Primitive War is a masterclass in immersive visual storytelling, and what makes it extraordinary is how every frame feels intentional. Every shadow, every lens choice, every camera movement is designed to place you directly inside the chaos, fear, and primal beauty of the story's world. This isn't just about making the jungle look dangerous. It's about crafting a living, breathing environment that constantly interacts with the characters and dictates the emotional rhythm of the narrative. From the very first frame, the visual language announces that you're stepping into a brutal, untamed realm where survival depends on instinct as much as strength. The opening shots establish this tone perfectly. Instead of flashy, high-speed edits, the camera begins slow and grounded, gliding just above the terrain, brushing past dew-soaked leaves, boots stomping through damp mud, and steam rising from the earth. These quiet, deliberate movements let you feel the environment before the action even begins. The cinematographer leans heavily into perspective-driven storytelling, using a shoulder-height follow cam that keeps us locked with the soldiers as they trek deeper into the valley. This choice traps the audience in their boots, never letting us escape the tension or gain a safe distance. But as the movie progresses, the framing begins to open up. Towering anamorphic wides capture the endless wilderness, emphasizing how small and powerless the squad truly is. These panoramic shots aren't just scenic, they're intimidating, forcing you to confront the scale of the battlefield and the insignificance of the humans within it. Lens choice plays an essential role in shaping tone and mood. In confined jungle passages, wider lenses stretch the trees unnaturally tall, making the surroundings feel oppressive and alien. The tight depth of field makes the walls of leaves blur into a surreal green haze, increasing claustrophobia while focusing your attention on sweat, panic, and minute character expressions. But when the danger comes from beyond the trees, the cinematographer switches to longer telephoto lenses, flattening layers of foliage so enemies seem impossibly close, even when they're still hidden. This visual compression plays a cruel psychological trick. It forces the characters, and us, to believe threats are everywhere, creating tension even before anything attacks. Lighting design is equally powerful, making Primitive War visually distinctive and emotionally charged. Daylight sequences are shot with a restrained, naturalistic palette, where the jungle canopy scatters beams of harsh, directional sunlight, constantly breaking the frame into shafts of light and shadow. The diffuse humidity gives everything a soft haze, while patches of blinding white sky puncture through gaps in the leaves, a technique that mirrors the character's fractured state of mind. But at night, the cinematography switches gears completely, becoming theatrical, experimental, and downright haunting. Flares, torchlight, and muzzle flashes become the only sources of illumination, carving faces out of darkness while hiding predators in silhouette. Entire firefights are lit almost exclusively by strobing bursts from gunfire, freezing micro-moments of terror frame by frame, like flipping through horrifying snapshots in real time. The way shadows and partial visibility are used heightens the primal terror. The less you see, the more your imagination fills in the danger lurking beyond. The color grading amplifies this mood. For the jungle, the palette leans into earthy, muted tones, rich greens, muddy ochres, damp blues, drained just enough to make everything feel gritty and real without tipping into stylized fantasy. But once the narrative transitions into scenes involving human experimentation, underground facilities, or hidden camps, the grading shifts drastically into colder, high-contrast tones, replacing natural warmth with sickly fluorescence and sterile grays. It's a deliberate choice that mirrors the film's thematic conflict: primal wilderness versus technological hubris, instinct versus control, chaos versus manipulation. These tonal contrasts between environments aren't just aesthetic, they subconsciously cue the audience about shifts in power dynamics, story beats, and emotional weight. The framing and composition are loaded with visual motifs that deepen the story without any dialogue. Recurring images: a dropped compass lying in the mud, dog tags half buried in wet earth, footprints dissolving in the rain, appear subtly in the edges of the frame, reminding you of mortality, loss, and the invisible histories layered beneath the battle unfolding. When the squad is unified, shots are composed symmetrically, balancing them evenly across the frame as if to visually represent order and stability. But when panic spreads and alliances fracture, the framing destabilizes, off-center compositions, tilted angles, and obstructed perspectives dominate the screen, placing branches, shadows, and equipment between us and the characters. This gradual visual breakdown mirrors the psychological unraveling of the soldiers as much as the narrative itself. Camera movement is meticulously crafted to control tension. In moments of calm reconnaissance, the camera glides on a gimbal, drifting silently behind characters as though the jungle itself is watching them. But when ambushes erupt, the cinematography snaps into erratic handheld, capturing the chaos of survival with jagged frames, blurred edges, and kinetic energy that places the audience directly inside the confusion. Some of the most intense sequences are captured in single, unbroken takes. One standout involves a nighttime river crossing where the camera drifts across the water, following characters as silent ripples break around them until something beneath the surface finally stirs. By refusing to cut, the filmmakers deny the audience relief, forcing you to endure tension in real time. Primitive War also uses perspective tricks to make the predators terrifying long before they're fully revealed. Low-angle, ground-level shots show trampled grass and rustling leaves just at the frame's edge, suggesting something impossibly large crawling past unseen. Reflections in water pools, fractured glimpses through smoke, and distorted silhouettes hint at monstrous forms without handing you a clear image, letting your imagination create horrors far greater than any CGI model could. When the creatures are finally revealed in full, it's always earned. The cinematography builds tension layer by layer until the payoff lands with maximum impact. Finally, the film thrives on its iconic visual set pieces, moments designed to leave lasting impressions. A solitary soldier standing waist-deep in murky water as sunlight pierces through a mist-filled canopy. A flare arcing into the black sky and painting the trilene blood red for just a few seconds before plunging everyone back into darkness. A silent aerial pullback revealing tiny human figures swallowed by an endless, green ocean of trees, visually hammering home just how powerless they are against the forces hunting them. These images, paired with atmospheric sound design, create sequences that burn themselves into memory. The editing and pacing in Primitive War 2025 aren't just technical choices, they're narrative weapons, shaping how you experience the story rather than simply watch it unfold. From the opening frame, the editor establishes control over tension, rhythm, and emotional immersion. The first act is deliberately restrained, using longer takes, measured dissolves, and strategic pauses to let you settle into the character's world before chaos erupts. The opening reconnaissance sequences, for instance, are built on smooth, unhurried cuts, allowing the viewer to scan the jungle, read the squad's body language, and notice subtle environmental hints. The editor wants you to feel the thick air, hear the buzzing insects, and sense that something unseen is always nearby. These early choices create a sense of mounting unease, and by the time the first shocking encounter happens, the shift in cutting style is dramatic and deeply effective. Suddenly, the edit abandons its careful, meditative rhythm and snaps into rapid, overlapping fragments. Handheld camera beats sliced together with staccato pacing, intercutting reaction shots, POV glimpses, and disorienting flashes of creature movement. This contrast weaponizes pacing, translating the squad's panic directly onto the viewer. One of the most impressive aspects of the editing is how it maintains spatial clarity even during high-stakes chaos. War and survival films often risk losing the audience in confusion, but Primitive War uses clever structural choices, establishing wides before tight cross-cutting, anchoring action to recognizable environmental markers like riverbanks or collapsed trees, to ensure viewers always know where they are within the terrain. The editor relies heavily on match cuts and motion continuity to carry momentum. A soldier whipping his rifle to the left in one shot flows directly into another soldier reacting to movement from the same direction, keeping you grounded inside the choreography of danger. When tension spikes, the cross-cutting quickens, but it never fully descends into incoherence. Instead, controlled chaos dominates. You feel the terror, yet the geography remains legible. Transitions between scenes are another strength. The editor often uses J-cuts, where dialogue or environmental sounds bleed into the next frame, maintaining narrative fluidity and emotional continuity. There's an incredible sequence where the growl of an unseen predator in the jungle dissolves directly into the rumble of thunder over a briefing tent, connecting two entirely separate narrative beats while sustaining mood. These techniques make the film feel seamless, as though the camera is simply carrying us from one moment to the next without interruption. Match-on-action edits and graphic matches also appear throughout. For example, a soldier flicking a spent bullet casing in one shot cuts perfectly into a rolling compass needle in another, symbolically tying small details into broader thematic ideas like fate, uncertainty, and primal survival. Montages are used sparingly but effectively to compress time and amplify the squad's physical and psychological decline. Midway through the film, we get a chilling sequence depicting days of silent jungle traversal, blisters forming, dwindling ammo stacks, rain-soaked uniforms, and maps disintegrating in the mud. These are clipped together at a slightly faster pace than the main narrative flow, which creates a sense of inevitable attrition without feeling rushed. By contrast, certain moments deliberately refuse to cut quickly, such as a long, unbroken take where the squad crawls through knee-deep water while distant growls reverberate off unseen caves. Here, the editor weaponizes stillness and duration, forcing the audience to sit in dread rather than escape through quick transitions. Sound design and editing are tightly intertwined, and the pacing relies heavily on auditory cues to drive rhythm. The editor frequently uses sound bridges, carrying ambient noises, heavy breathing, or creature shrieks across cuts, to bind disparate shots into one flowing emotional moment. Equally powerful are the silences. At key moments, everything drops out. No dialogue, no score, just shallow breathing and distant rustles, creating an almost unbearable pressure before chaos returns with explosive violence. The deliberate interplay of audio and visual cutting keeps the viewer on edge, training them to expect danger even when nothing is visible on screen. The film's midpoint is where the editor's craftsmanship truly peaks. The pacing alternates between stretches of quiet strategizing and sudden, heart-pounding bursts of survival horror, mirroring the emotional whiplash of the squad's experience. A standout example is the night ambush sequence. The editing fractures time, cycling between infrared POV shots, blinding muzzle flashes, and distorted handheld fragments of faces screaming into darkness. The cuts are so rapid they seem disorienting at first, but then you realize the editor is matching the squad's panic beat for beat, collapsing your sense of safety alongside theirs. These techniques immerse the audience directly into the soldiers' confusion, making you feel hunted rather than simply watching them be hunted. In the final act, the pacing accelerates relentlessly. Cross-cutting dominates here, interweaving multiple narrative threads, one team setting explosive charges, another attempting a desperate extraction, and a third engaging a nightmarish predator. Each thread builds tension independently, but the cuts between them shorten with each beat, creating a sensation of escalating inevitability. The editor manipulates timing so that climactic events land with maximum impact, lingering just long enough on each outcome before hurtling into the next. Interestingly, though, the climax doesn't end with a chaotic flourish. Instead, the editor pulls back and lets one extended, uninterrupted shot capture the emotional fallout, giving the audience room to breathe after relentless intensity. Character arcs are subtly reflected in the editing rhythm as well. The squad leader's early scenes are covered in steady, deliberate shots, projecting confidence and control. As his psyche deteriorates under pressure, his coverage fragments, relying on rapid cuts, shaky perspectives, and extreme close-ups, visually externalizing his unraveling mental state. Similarly, tension between characters often dictates pacing. Scenes of camaraderie breathe with longer coverage, while arguments or breakdowns snap into tighter cutting patterns that heighten claustrophobia. That said, the editing isn't flawless. Some dialogue-driven interludes in the second act slightly overstay their welcome, slowing momentum just when the narrative could benefit from trimming. A handful of transitional montages rely on familiar war film cliches, faded stills, blurred map overlays, that feel more functional than inventive compared to the film's otherwise bold choices. And during one climactic facility raid, the editor deliberately sacrifices a touch of spatial clarity for raw panic. Some viewers may find the disorientation challenging, though it's clear the effect is intentional. Despite these minor imperfections, Primitive War's editing and pacing operate on a deeply immersive level. It's not just about maintaining flow, it's about sculpting anxiety, manipulating breath, and forcing you into the jungle alongside the characters. The soundtrack and score of Primitive War 2025 are not just accompaniments, they're the film's hidden nervous system, a pulse that drives tension, emotion, and dread through every frame. It's one of those rare scores where the composer doesn't simply add background music, but builds an entire sonic ecosystem that grows and evolves alongside the story. Instead of relying on predictable action beats or cheap musical stingers, the score weaves an intricate web of themes, textures, and silence, pulling the audience deeper into the psychological chaos of the characters and the primal terror of the world they inhabit. From the opening scene, the soundscape sets the tone. It begins with a low, resonant hum layered under subtle, naturalistic field recordings of buzzing insects and distant, distorted calls. Then, almost imperceptibly, the hum transforms into a slow, ominous drone, introducing the film's central motif, a creeping, two-note figure that acts like a heartbeat, always lurking, always reminding you that something ancient and dangerous is awake. The composer structures the score around distinct leitmotifs, but instead of presenting them in traditional melodies, each motif is defined by timbre, rhythm, and sonic texture. The squad's theme, for instance, is a taut, militaristic cue composed of deep cello strokes, muffled toms, and metallic percussive accents that sound like gear clinking under stress. Early in the film, it carries a sense of confidence and cohesion, matching the soldiers' discipline and focus. But as the narrative unravels and trust within the group begins to fracture, this theme deteriorates, notes drop out, rhythms become irregular, and instruments are detuned until the original structure is barely recognizable, reflecting the squad's mental and emotional breakdown. One of the most haunting motifs belongs to the youngest recruit. Initially, it's delicate and almost innocent, a faint, pentatonic phrase played on celesta and layered with soft woodwinds, a sonic reminder of his youth and vulnerability amidst chaos. But as the story progresses and the horrors of the jungle consume him, this motif undergoes an unsettling transformation. The same notes are replayed in distorted, reverb-drenched tones, layered with subharmonic frequencies that rumble beneath the melody, creating a chilling effect. By the climax, his once bright theme is almost unrecognizable, a hollow, ghostly echo of its former self, symbolizing the loss of innocence and humanity in the face of primal violence. Equally powerful is the motif assigned to the local guide, whose knowledge of the jungle and its spiritual weight gives the story an added layer of mystique. This motif draws on traditional rhythmic patterns and percussive techniques native to the region, but the composer avoids stereotypes and instead integrates these sounds organically into the score. Often, the guide's musical cues are introduced diegetically, a rhythmic drumbeat heard faintly from a ritual, a soft whistle carried on the wind, before dissolving seamlessly into the orchestration. This creates a fascinating ambiguity. You're never sure where the line between the world of the characters and the composer's score truly lies, which deepens the immersive experience. The creatures, however, have no melody in the traditional sense. Their presence is expressed through sound design fused with composition, creating a visceral, almost tactile sonic identity. The composer uses processed animal calls, bowed cymbals, metallic screeches, and sub-bass drones to make their sonic footprint overwhelming yet unpredictable. Many of these frequencies exist on the edge of audibility, designed to be felt in the chest more than heard in the ears. This clever manipulation of infrasonic elements creates an unconscious unease. You may not register the sound consciously, but your body reacts. During one of the film's most nerve-shredding sequences, there's a stretch where the soundscape drops to a faint, rumbling vibration layered with distant distorted growls, and the silence between these sounds becomes suffocating. The result is primal. The music taps directly into the human nervous system, evoking fight-or-flight responses without the audience even realizing why. In contrast, the laboratory and scientific elements of the film are scored with a completely different palette: precise, crystalline synth arpeggios, electronic pulses, and processed glassy textures that mirror sterility and control. The lab's cues almost feel alien compared to the raw, chaotic tones of the jungle. What's fascinating, though, is how the two sonic worlds begin to bleed into each other as the story progresses. By the third act, the clean, structured synth patterns collide with the organic, chaotic motifs of the jungle, resulting in complex layered compositions where order and entropy clash, an oral metaphor for the collision between science and nature, control and chaos. Silence plays an equally critical role in the score's design. Instead of filling every moment with constant music, the composer understands the power of restraint. Some of the film's most unsettling scenes are built on the absence of sound, where the jungle's natural ambience takes over. The rustle of leaves, the distant buzz of insects, a single twig snapping underfoot. These stretches of silence heighten tension because they make the audience hyper-aware, forcing them to lean in and anticipate danger. Then, when the score finally does return, whether it's a sudden percussive hit, a swelling drone, or a fragmented melody, the impact lands twice as hard. The dynamic range of the score is equally impressive. At times, it whispers so faintly that you feel like you're eavesdropping on the jungle's secrets. At other times, it roars into layered crescendos of pounding percussion, distorted brass, and shattering electronic waves that physically shake the theater. The sound mixing is immaculate. The score never competes with the sound effects but instead blends with them to create an immersive auditory experience. Gunfire, footsteps, rain, and breathing are subtly incorporated into the score's rhythm, blurring the line between diegetic and non-diegetic sound. This integration is particularly effective during battle sequences where the music doesn't sit on top of the chaos. It is the chaos, syncing perfectly with rapid cuts and frenzied camera movements to elevate the sensation of panic. There are also standout compositions that serve as emotional anchors throughout the film. The river crossing cue, for example, is a minimalistic masterpiece: soft, solitary piano notes paired with low, pulsing timpani and barely there string harmonics, creating a haunting, fragile tension that mirrors the character's fear of what lies ahead. In another scene, a wordless human vocal, processed with reverb and stretched into near unrecognizability, drifts in the background, giving the moment a ritualistic, almost otherworldly weight. Perhaps the most memorable musical moment arrives near the climax, where the main creature motif erupts into a cacophony of distorted brass, layered percussion, and guttural drones, only to suddenly collapse into near silence as a single mournful trumpet carries the emotional aftermath. In the end, the soundtrack of Primitive War isn't just a companion to the film, it's a living, breathing extension of its narrative and emotional core. It captures the raw, untamed spirit of the jungle, the claustrophobic tension of survival, and the unsettling mystery behind what lurks in the shadows. Primitive War 2025 is not just a survival action thriller, it's a layered exploration of human instinct, morality, and the consequences of tampering with forces we barely understand. Beneath the intense jungle chases, roaring predators, and tactical warfare lies a carefully constructed narrative about humanity's fragile place in the natural order and the cost of unchecked ambition. At its core, the film examines the collision between science, power, and survival, using its characters, setting, and soundscape to build a thematic experience that goes far beyond typical genre conventions. One of the central ideas driving the story is the hubris of human control. The premise revolves around experiments and decisions made in secrecy, the kind of classified operations where scientists, soldiers, and politicians believe they can dominate nature and bend evolution to their will. But Primitive War flips that narrative. Nature isn't passive here. It fights back, violently and unpredictably. From the very beginning, the film plants seeds of this idea through visual symbolism: trampled soldier helmets in the mud, claw marks etched into abandoned vehicles, half-buried dog tags scattered like warnings from past attempts to conquer what should not be conquered. These recurring motifs quietly reinforce the theme without relying on exposition. By the time the chaos unfolds, the audience already senses the inevitable. Humans are not in control. They never were. Alongside this ecological reckoning runs a deeper meditation on the psychology of war and survival. Primitive War places soldiers in a situation where their training collides with primal instinct. The authority of command structures slowly erodes as conditions worsen. The leader's strategic control slips, decisions become impulsive, and alliances fracture under pressure. The emotional impact comes from watching characters transform under extreme stress: a battle-hardened commander who begins to question his own morality, a young recruit whose naive confidence breaks as reality crushes him, and a local guide who emerges as the moral compass of the group, revealing a perspective the soldiers are too arrogant or too frightened to fully understand. The relationships between characters aren't just functional to the plot, they are essential to the film's emotional weight. Bonds of trust are tested when survival instincts take over, and this creates a thematic tension between loyalty and self-preservation. Primitive War suggests that morality isn't absolute in the wilderness. Instead, it bends under duress, shifting with each encounter and each threat. Some characters adapt to survive, others resist compromise and pay the price, while a few cross lines they can never return from. The film doesn't judge them, it observes them, forcing the audience to question what choices they might make in the same situation. Another recurring thematic thread is exploitation, not just of nature but of people, cultures, and power itself. The setting is treated almost like a character, with the jungle acting as both protector and predator. Through subtle environmental storytelling, the film hints at an unspoken history. This land has seen conquest, extraction, and manipulation long before the soldiers arrived. The inclusion of the local guide and his knowledge underscores a clash of worldviews. While the outsiders see the jungle as a battleground or a scientific opportunity, the locals understand it as a living system with its own laws. This cultural friction deepens the narrative, adding layers of meaning about human arrogance and the danger of imposing control over spaces we don't truly comprehend. The filmmaking choices mirror these themes beautifully. Cinematography plays a crucial role in shaping the story's underlying messages. Wide overhead shots emphasize the insignificance of human figures swallowed by endless terrain, while tight handheld tracking sequences throw the audience into the claustrophobic chaos of ambushes and attacks. Editing sharpens this sense of unpredictability, shifting between calm, drawn-out sequences of exploration and sudden bursts of violent action, reflecting the instability of the character's situation. Even silence is weaponized here. The score often drops away at key moments, allowing only the sound of wind, rustling leaves, distant roars, and hurried breaths to dominate the space, creating an atmosphere where nature feels alive, watchful, and inescapable. The music itself becomes an active part of the storytelling. The soundtrack uses two distinct sonic identities that represent the film's competing forces: cold, synthetic tones tied to military and scientific operations, contrasted with deep, organic drum patterns and primal chants that evoke the untamed power of the jungle. These layers blend and clash throughout the movie, often building toward explosive crescendos where the score mirrors the chaos on screen. Yet, the moments of silence carry equal weight. When the music cuts out entirely, the audience is left suspended in uncertainty, their senses sharpened alongside the characters. One of the most compelling aspects of Primitive War is its refusal to provide easy answers. The ending doesn't resolve neatly. It leaves space for ambiguity, inviting viewers to wrestle with the consequences long after the credits roll. Survivors are left carrying secrets and scars, both physical and psychological. Classified files are buried, truths are suppressed, and the official story presented to the world barely scratches the surface of what really happened. This refusal to neatly tie up its themes makes the experience more haunting. It suggests that some traumas can't be contained, some forces can't be controlled, and some questions don't have clean resolutions. Other subtle thematic threads ripple beneath the surface: masculinity and fragility, the politics of expendability, and the human tendency to rationalize destruction when ordered from above. Primitive War constantly asks the audience to sit with contradictions. It highlights how science can be both a tool of progress and a weapon of devastation, how authority can provide stability while also creating blind obedience, and how survival can make heroes, cowards, and monsters out of the same people, depending on circumstance. What makes Primitive War so impactful is the way it communicates its themes cinematically rather than relying on dialogue-heavy explanations. It trusts the audience to observe, to notice, and to feel. A rusted rifle left behind in the mud says more than an entire monologue about failed missions. A silent stare exchanged between two soldiers conveys more emotional complexity than pages of scripted confession. Even when the film introduces archival-style inserts and fragmented military reports, they serve more to deepen mystery than to clarify it, leaving viewers unsettled rather than reassured. The visual effects in Primitive War are the backbone of its cinematic experience, and expanding on their execution reveals just how ambitious and meticulously layered the film's approach really is. Unlike generic monster movies that dump weightless CGI creatures onto empty frames, this film treats VFX as a deeply integrated storytelling tool, grounding every digital effect in physicality, environmental interaction, and emotional stakes. The goal isn't just to make dinosaurs, jungle creatures, and prehistoric landscapes look real, but to make them feel alive, to make you sense the danger, smell the humidity, and feel like you're stranded alongside the characters. The way this is achieved is through a sophisticated balance between practical effects, cutting-edge CGI, on-set integration, and precision compositing that immerses the audience into the chaos of a prehistoric nightmare. The production smartly avoids leaning solely on CGI, knowing that fully digital creatures can often look fake if the actors aren't grounded in something tangible. Instead, for close-up moments, like a raptor breathing inches from someone's face, claws brushing over wet skin, or blood dripping from a freshly torn carcass, the team uses animatronics, prosthetics, and puppetry. These practical builds are absurdly detailed, featuring silicone skin with layered translucency, micro-textured pores, embedded vein work, and moisture systems that keep creatures looking alive under harsh jungle lighting. These on-set models give the actors something physical to react to, which keeps performances natural and makes the stakes more believable. CGI then enhances these builds, extending jaw articulation, adding subtle eye blinks, saliva strands, tail whips, or entire appendages that can't physically exist on set. When the camera pulls back and full-body creatures come into frame, the CGI pipeline carries the weight. Instead of cheap motion capture shortcuts, the animation team studied real-world biomechanics, gathering high-speed reference footage of crocodiles, birds of prey, Komodo dragons, and big cats to build a motion library. Keyframe animation dominates, giving the creatures distinct personalities. Some move like stealthy predators, others with clumsy bulk, and some with frantic twitch responses that make them unpredictable. Each rig incorporates muscle simulations, secondary jiggle dynamics, fat compression, and tendon tension layers, allowing the skin to fold, stretch, and ripple realistically as the creatures exert force. This meticulous attention to weight and physics is what prevents these monsters from looking like floating polygons. Instead, they slam into the environment, displacing debris, shaking branches, and leaving traces that feel earned. The surface shading and texturing work is equally impressive. Every scale, feather, scar, and mud patch is constructed from layered procedural and hand-painted maps, diffuse for base colors, normal maps for microdetail, displacement for raised ridges, and subsurface scattering, SSS, for translucent skin regions like ears or thin membranes. The lighting team captures on-set HDRI spheres to perfectly replicate real-world conditions inside the renderer, meaning that when a raptor steps into a sunbeam filtered through wet foliage, its skin refracts and scatters light exactly as it would in camera. Moisture and dirt simulations add to the realism. Creatures don't stay pristine but pick up mud, leaves, and splatter naturally during their movements, tracked dynamically by the shaders themselves rather than manually painted frame by frame. Integration is where many VFX-heavy films fail, but here Primitive War thrives. On set, the cinematography team captures not just lighting references, but lens data, depth of field calibrations, motion blur rates, and practical grain profiles, ensuring that every digital shot inherits the same optical imperfections as live-action footage. In post-production, compositors go layer by layer, matching shadows, reflections, and occlusion so seamlessly that even close observers struggle to tell what's digital. They use light wraps to make sure creature edges interact with surrounding light realistically, while subtle motion vector passes keep blurs consistent across foreground and background layers. Grain is applied at the final stage, merging practical and digital elements into a unified visual signature, preventing the dreaded floating sticker look where CG pops unnaturally from its environment. Environmental VFX also play a massive role. Primitive War isn't shot entirely on location. Vast sections of the jungle, swamps, and rivers are digital extensions. When creatures crash through foliage, leaves bend and tear using procedural physics simulations, branches splinter under precise force vectors, and volumetric mist shifts dynamically with displaced air pressure. The rivers and rainfall sequences are especially challenging, requiring hybrid effects that blend real water elements with flip fluid simulations for splashes, droplets, and rippling wake trails. These effects don't sit passively in the frame. They're reactive, interacting with characters and creatures in ways that make the ecosystem feel truly alive. One of the boldest choices in the film's visual design is its restraint. The director avoids revealing too much too soon, using silhouettes, reflections, shifting shadows, and partial obscuration to hint at a predator's presence before a full reveal. This not only builds tension but reduces dependency on hyper-detailed full-body renders, letting the audience's imagination amplify the danger. However, when the film does commit to showcasing its monsters in broad daylight, the CGI holds up spectacularly because every layer, animation, shading, lighting, and interaction has been grounded in reality from day one. Still, the execution isn't flawless. There are moments where minor mismatches break the illusion, a scale detail that resolves slightly too sharp against softer backgrounds, motion blur inconsistencies in fast action sequences, or particles that fail to pick up ambient light realistically. In rare cases, weight feels slightly off, particularly when creatures leap vertically or make abrupt changes in momentum. But the film cleverly masks these shortcomings through smart editorial pacing and heavy reliance on hybrid shots, never holding digital effects longer than they can sustain realism. Where the effects truly shine is in compositional layering. The VFX team doesn't just throw rendered creatures into finished plates, they pass through multiple render outputs: diffuse, specular, subsurface, AO, velocity, volume masks, and interactive light passes that allow compositors granular control. The result is tactile, Sweat glistens on a soldier's face as a nearby predator exhales humid air. A rifle flash illuminates both practical mud and digital scales, and storms push CG rain into live-action close-ups, without visible seams. Primitive War succeeds because it treats VFX not as a gimmick, but as a narrative device. The effects aren't there to wow you in isolation. They're there to expand the danger, tension, and chaos of the prehistoric nightmare without ever pulling you out of the story. The creatures aren't distractions. They're characters in their own right, animated and lit with intent rather than flashy excess. The set design and locations in Primitive War 2025 are among the most ambitious, immersive, and narratively charged elements of the entire film. This isn't just about placing characters in a jungle or dressing up a few props for authenticity. The production design crafts an entire living, breathing ecosystem where every leaf, stone, ruin, and structure contributes to the storytelling. It's world-building done on a scale that blurs the line between environment and character, creating spaces so richly textured and believable that they become as essential to the plot's emotional weight as the actors themselves. From the very first frame, the set design establishes tone and atmosphere. The opening sequence doesn't simply introduce a jungle. It throws the audience headfirst into an environment so dense and layered that it feels oppressive. You can practically feel the humidity, smell the rotting vegetation, and hear the distant hiss of unseen predators. The crew didn't rely on generic greenery. They meticulously constructed a multi-dimensional visual language for the wild. There are layered canopies that create sharp contrasts of light and shadow, tangled vines that crisscross like veins over long-forgotten ruins, and pools of stagnant water alive with insects, adding a tactile realism that makes you believe this world is untamed and dangerous. The mud isn't fake. The branches don't look staged. Every texture is physical, touchable, and interactive, making the environment respond dynamically to character and creature movement. What elevates the set design further is how storytelling is embedded into physical spaces. Take, for example, the abandoned outposts scattered throughout the jungle. These aren't just set pieces. They're archaeological traces of human ambition, desperation, and failure. Half-collapsed watchtowers covered in moss, rusting radios buzzing with faint static, and overturned crates of supplies tell a silent story of past operations gone wrong. Blood-stained documents, faded maps pinned to cracked wooden walls, and broken photographs of families left behind are the kind of details that make these places emotionally charged rather than purely decorative. Without a single line of dialogue, these environments provide backstory, suggesting the failures of earlier expeditions and foreshadowing the deadly stakes the current squad faces. The lab environments introduce a striking visual contrast to the chaos of the wild. Unlike the organic, unpredictable sprawl of the jungle, the labs are meticulously designed to represent humankind's attempt to impose order on nature. Walls of steel, pristine glass panels, modular shelving stacked with samples, and fluorescent lighting create a cold, sterile atmosphere where everything feels controlled until the inevitable breakdown. The tension between these two design philosophies, nature's chaos versus human order, is reinforced visually at every turn, making the transition between jungle and lab sequences feel thematically significant rather than abrupt. The difference in mood between these spaces deepens the underlying conflict, humanity's hubris clashing against forces it cannot control. Props play a monumental role in selling this believability. Weapons are worn down and weathered instead of looking fresh from a studio warehouse. Soldiers' boots are cracked and coated with grime. Radios show chipped paint and fading labels, and field notebooks are filled with scrawled, water-damaged coordinates. Even the smaller artifacts, dog tags buried in wet soil, half-burned letters clinging to embers, primitive traps hidden under moss, communicate layers of history and personal stakes without forcing exposition. There's a deliberate choice to avoid over-sanitized props. Everything feels handled, battered, and tested by real time and weather. The locations themselves are characters, carefully chosen to create narrative tension and variety while keeping viewers visually engaged. Narrow river gorges limit maneuverability and become natural choke points, generating suspense during ambush sequences. Elevated ridges allow for breathtaking, establishing shots, capturing both the vastness of the jungle and the claustrophobia of being trapped inside it. Swampy wetlands force slower pacing during tense encounters, with sinking mud and hidden hazards shaping the choreography of action scenes. One particular set, a cavern carved into limestone, lit entirely by improvised torchwork, turns into a hauntingly beautiful moment where sound, shadows, and flame-painted walls heighten the primal terror of discovery. Each location serves a dual purpose: visual spectacle and functional storytelling. Where the film truly excels is in practical set integration with visual effects. Rather than relying entirely on CGI, the production team built extensive practical environments, ensuring creatures and actors interact with real surfaces, foliage, and debris. Mud splashes naturally when dinosaurs charge. Branches snap underfoot and stay broken. Water ripples when something massive moves off-screen. This kind of environmental response is essential to grounding the unbelievable in a tactile reality, making the hybrid of practical sets and digital creatures seamless and immersive. Cultural and historical authenticity is also woven into the locations. Primitive War avoids treating indigenous elements as shallow aesthetic dressing and instead gives them weight and narrative function. Ritual altars, ceremonial carvings, handwoven traps, and locally sourced tools are all designed with reference to real-world traditions, presented as meaningful artifacts rather than exotic props. This layer of respect for cultural specificity gives the film's world added credibility while deepening the stakes when the conflict expands beyond simple survival into questions of heritage, territory, and history. Even small details are used for visual callbacks and emotional resonance. A map seen early in the film shows markings that later line up with a crashed helicopter deep in the jungle, creating continuity between scenes. A soldier's broken watch, introduced as a throwaway prop, becomes a symbolic marker in one of the climactic reveals. These layered choices make the set design more than just visual dressing. They create narrative threads that reward attentive viewers. Finally, the locations shape not only the action but also the psychology of the characters. Wide, open riverbeds give fleeting moments of relief, while suffocating corridors of twisted foliage feed paranoia and unease. The geography mirrors the characters' mental states. As they descend deeper into hostile territory, the spaces become tighter, darker, and more chaotic, amplifying tension at a subconscious level. The audience doesn't just watch the characters getting lost. They feel lost alongside them, disoriented by shifting topographies and the unpredictable hostility of the wild. By the end, the set design and locations of Primitive War become inseparable from its emotional and thematic weight. They create a fully realized, dangerous, and tactile world where nothing feels accidental. Every tree root, burned-out radio, ruined outpost, and sterile lab corridor is in service of immersing the audience, giving actors authentic spaces to inhabit and grounding the spectacle of creatures and chaos in a believable physical reality. The environments are alive, not just as backdrops, but as evolving participants in the narrative, shaping events as much as the characters themselves. The dialogue and script of Primitive War are the backbone of the film's tension, emotional weight, and immersive storytelling. It's one of those rare screenplays where every word feels deliberately chosen, and yet, nothing about it feels forced or unnatural. The writer understands that dialogue is not just about characters exchanging information. It's about power, emotion, survival, and the small fragments of humanity clung to in a world unraveling around them. From the very first scene, where the soldiers exchange dry, clipped remarks laced with fatigue and suppressed fear, you're immediately pulled into their mental state. Their words are short, purposeful, and charged with meaning, exactly the way real soldiers speak when they know every unnecessary breath could give away their position. The conversations carry a kind of raw honesty that gives the illusion you're eavesdropping on reality rather than watching scripted exchanges. One of the strengths of the writing is the way it creates distinct, recognizable voices for each character. You never have to guess who is speaking, even if the camera isn't showing them. The squad leader's dialogue is authoritative, measured, and weighted with responsibility. He rarely wastes words, and when he does open up emotionally, The restraint makes those moments hit with devastating force. The second-in-command speaks differently. His sarcasm is sharper, his jokes darker, and there's an undercurrent of cynicism beneath his remarks, the kind you only earn from years of seeing too many things go wrong. The rookie, on the other hand, has a tentative way of speaking, often cutting himself off mid-thought, trying to find the right words to fit into this hardened world while masking his inexperience. Even the local guide's dialogue is unique, steeped in cultural proverbs and riddles, speaking less to give answers and more to plant questions in both the characters and the audience's minds. This layering of unique voices creates natural friction and chemistry between the characters, which adds depth to every conflict and decision. The script also uses dialogue as a clever tool for world building without dumping exposition directly onto the audience. Instead of a character blandly explaining the prehistoric horrors they're facing, the film builds mystery through fragments, snippets of overheard radio transmissions, scrawled lab notes found in abandoned facilities, hushed arguments between soldiers about classified orders. You slowly piece together what's happening, and this approach makes you feel like an active participant in the story rather than a passive observer. The characters don't spoon-feed answers because they themselves don't fully understand the dangers surrounding them, and that uncertainty bleeds into every line they deliver. It's a writing choice that keeps you leaning forward, listening closely, waiting for the next clue to drop. Humor is another vital component of the script, but it's handled with precision. This isn't forced comedy shoehorned into a grim scenario. It's the kind of gallows humor soldiers cling to when the darkness threatens to consume them. A sarcastic jab during a tense standoff, a wry remark after surviving an impossible attack, or a quiet joke shared between two friends over a fading campfire. These moments don't undercut the danger. They highlight the humanity beneath the armor. The laughter feels fragile, like something that might break at any second, and because of that, the humor actually amplifies the tension instead of dissolving it. One of the screenplay's most impressive achievements is its use of silence. The film trusts its audience enough to let pauses speak louder than words. There are scenes where dialogue stops entirely, and the soundscape, the distant hum of jungle insects, the soft rustle of foliage, the heavy breathing of men too scared to make a sound, becomes the conversation. When a soldier locks eyes with another across a clearing, no words are exchanged, but the shared terror is palpable. These quiet beats allow the actors' performances to shine, and they give the audience a moment to breathe, anticipate, and fear what's coming next. The script is also packed with memorable, quotable lines that stay with you long after the credits roll, not because they're flashy or overwritten, but because they distill the essence of survival into sharp, cutting language. One standout comes from the squad leader, muttered over the grave of a fallen comrade. The jungle takes what it wants. We're just passing through. Another comes during a moment of desperation when the rookie whispers, I thought monsters were supposed to look different from us. These are lines that define character arcs, encapsulate themes, and deepen the film's sense of existential dread. They work not because they sound profound in isolation, but because the story earns them. Structurally, the writing balances high-intensity action scenes with quieter, reflective moments in a way that maintains momentum without overwhelming the audience. The dialogue during firefights is short, clipped, and functional. Commands shouted, warnings exchanged, breaths ragged. But outside the chaos, conversations stretch, allowing characters to reveal more of themselves and letting relationships evolve. This ebb and flow in the rhythm of speech mirrors the pacing of the film itself, making the script feel alive and dynamic rather than monotonous. Another layer worth mentioning is how the writer integrates recurring motifs into the dialogue, subtle lines that echo across the story. A simple phrase like who gets to name the monsters? Resurfaces at pivotal moments, each time carrying a slightly different meaning based on what the characters and the audience have discovered about the world. These callbacks give the script cohesion and make the narrative feel meticulously constructed rather than loosely assembled. Finally, the strength of the screenplay lies in its emotional honesty. While Primitive War delivers action, spectacle, and adrenaline-pumping suspense, the dialogue never forgets that these are real human beings trying to survive in impossible circumstances. Every argument, confession, and whispered plea builds on the last, creating a cumulative emotional weight that pays off when the story reaches its darkest turns. Primitive War takes the genre it inhabits, a hybrid of war drama, survival thriller, sci-fi mystery, and creature horror, and pushes it far beyond simple formulas. It doesn't just play within genre conventions. It builds tension by constantly shifting the audience's expectations, using classic war film structures as a foundation, and then subverting them with moments of dread, moral uncertainty, and unexpected emotional weight. At its surface, the film begins with familiar beats, a covert military squad deployed deep into an uncharted jungle on a classified mission, tight-knit soldiers each carrying distinct personalities and backgrounds, a hidden agenda buried beneath official orders, and the sense that danger is stalking them before they even understand its shape. That setup feels recognizable by design. Primitive War lures you into thinking you know the trajectory, a mission, a threat, survival against overwhelming odds. But as the narrative unfolds, the film refuses to settle for simple archetypes and instead layers multiple genre frameworks into something bigger, darker, and more unpredictable. In terms of war film execution, it leans heavily on realism and authenticity. The tactics, equipment, chain of command tensions, and procedural precision of the soldiers create a grounded sense of danger where every bullet, every decision, and every mistake carries weight. Unlike many action-driven war movies, the film avoids hyper-stylized gunfights or overblown heroics. The violence here is chaotic, brutal, and messy, underscoring the real fragility of human survival in hostile territory. But just when audiences think they're watching a gritty combat drama, the movie pivots into creature feature horror, using the shadows, sounds, and implied glimpses of predators to build unease rather than relying on endless jump scares or showy CGI spectacle. This restrained approach honors classic monster movie storytelling, where suggestion drives fear far more effectively than exposure. A rustle in the trees, an echo of a distant roar, a half-glimpsed silhouette reflected in water. These subtle techniques make the unknown far more terrifying than anything fully revealed. But Primitive War doesn't just stop at tension building. It deepens its genre identity by weaving in rich layers of moral and psychological complexity. The sci-fi element enters gradually, unfolding through hints and fragments rather than heavy-handed exposition. Genetic experiments, lost research, and decades-old secrets begin surfacing, but instead of delivering neatly packaged answers, the film uses its central mystery to drive existential questions about control, survival, and the consequences of human interference with nature. Unlike formulaic blockbusters, there isn't a clean divide between heroes and villains. Even the supposed antagonists, whether military leaders, scientists, or the creatures themselves, are given motivations and perspectives that force the audience to constantly reevaluate allegiances and intentions. That blurring of moral lines adds richness to the storytelling, making it more than just a survival narrative. It becomes an exploration of human ambition, greed, and responsibility. One of the smartest choices in Primitive War's genre execution is its treatment of indigenous culture and local knowledge. Instead of using the indigenous guide character as a disposable trope or mystical plot device, the film integrates his worldview and rituals into the story with respect and authenticity. His perspective isn't treated as secondary, but as essential to understanding the deeper forces at play in the jungle, shifting the balance of power between science, superstition, and survival instinct. This choice adds texture to the narrative, grounding the supernatural and evolutionary elements in something that feels both ancient and believable. It also injects fresh thematic weight into the genre, using the clash between modern military arrogance and ancestral wisdom to underscore one of the film's recurring ideas: humanity's constant underestimation of forces beyond its control. Tonally, the film performs a balancing act between adrenaline and dread, pacing its transitions between genres with precision. Moments of high-octane combat are followed by stretches of breath-held silence where paranoia builds, and occasional flashes of dark humor from the squad provide fleeting relief without undermining the tension. The editing mirrors this tonal dance, using rapid, kinetic cuts during ambushes and sudden attacks, contrasted with long, unbroken takes that force viewers to sit in the unease of waiting. That interplay makes the suspense earned rather than manufactured, letting the audience breathe just long enough before plunging them into chaos again. This controlled rhythm separates primitive war from predictable survival thrillers that rely solely on constant action or jump scares to sustain energy. Another strength lies in how the film treats its creatures, not as gimmicks, but as fully realized elements of the world's ecology. The visual effects lean on a seamless blend of practical work and restrained CGI, making the predators feel grounded rather than cartoonish. By holding back their full reveal until deep into the story, the film allows tension to simmer naturally, rewarding patient viewers with a gradual escalation of scale and stakes. And yet, the creatures themselves are not merely external threats. They're symbols of deeper ideas, representing humanity's hubris, the dangers of tampering with nature, and the inevitability of chaos when systems of control fail. That layered use of horror imagery elevates the genre execution from spectacle-driven entertainment to something far more thematically resonant. Even within its genre fusion, Primitive War plays with expectations in clever ways. Where you anticipate an archetypal last stand, the film reframes its climax to focus less on brute force and more on hard choices, sacrifice, and survival of meaning rather than survival of numbers. Where you expect clear resolution, it deliberately leaves key moral questions unresolved, forcing audiences to sit with discomfort rather than delivering tidy, cathartic closure. That refusal to conform gives the movie an edge, making it linger in the mind long after the credits roll. In the end, Primitive War uses its hybrid nature, war film, horror, thriller, sci-fi mystery, to push against predictable boundaries. It honors the core mechanics of each genre, but layers them with atmosphere, cultural nuance, shifting alliances, and complex ethical stakes that keep viewers guessing until the very last frame. By grounding spectacle in realism, tension in silence, and meaning in ambiguity, the film proves that playing within genre expectations doesn't have to mean playing it safe. Instead, it transforms familiar frameworks into something immersive, unsettling, and refreshingly unpredictable. If you want, I can further expand this section by breaking down specific scenes and sequences where Primitive War bends or breaks genre rules, like the ambush scene, the lab discovery, or the final confrontation, and analyze how each moment plays with audience expectations. This would make the discussion even more detailed and cinematic. Should I? Primitive War deepens its social and cultural commentary far beyond what's expected from a genre film, threading layered political, ecological, and ethical critiques into the fabric of its story without ever pausing the action to lecture the audience. Every thematic beat is tied directly to character choices, visual motifs, and environmental details, making the messaging immersive rather than didactic. At its heart, the film examines the consequences of human arrogance, the belief that technological mastery grants dominion over nature, culture, and history. But instead of spelling this out, the film lets the environment, the survivors, and even silence communicate what power structures try to suppress. The jungle isn't just a backdrop, it's an active participant in the commentary, representing forces older and larger than human ambition. It stands as a living rebuke to humanity's obsession with control and extraction, constantly swallowing evidence, erasing borders, and reminding the characters and the audience that they are trespassers in a world they cannot dominate. One of the film's sharpest political undercurrents involves the militarization of science. The shadowy research program that sets the story in motion isn't portrayed as a faceless evil. Instead, the script humanizes its architects while revealing the systemic machinery behind them. Classified memos, hidden ledgers, and redacted documents litter the mise-en-scene, hinting at layers of corporate profiteering, state secrecy, and outsourced experimentation without clunky exposition dumps. The director leans into visual language, sterile lab equipment half buried in mud, scorched crates marked with ambiguous contractor logos, soldiers debating orders over muffled radio static, to suggest an entire world of geopolitical complexity behind the narrative's central mystery. It's a story about how institutions outsource risk while consolidating control, how military hierarchies push dangerous projects into remote, expendable zones, and how soldiers become pawns in experiments they barely understand. These themes feel unsettlingly relevant, resonating with modern debates about technological ethics, biological research, and who ultimately bears the cost when things go wrong. There's also an unflinching ecological message threaded into the film, but it's handled with restraint rather than moralizing. Primitive War doesn't romanticize nature, but it forces viewers to confront its scale, unpredictability, and authority. The jungle in the film is both a sanctuary and a battleground, shifting moods from breathtaking serenity to suffocating menace within the same sequence. This unpredictability reinforces the idea that humanity's attempts to control ecosystems are fragile illusions. Recurring visual motifs, dinosaur nests cracked open by storms, decaying research stations overtaken by moss, claw marks across man-made structures, symbolize nature's quiet retribution. Instead of preaching about climate change, de-extinction, or human interference, the film builds tension by showing how systems collapse when ancient forces are awakened without respect for balance. Silence often replaces dialogue in these scenes, letting the soundscape of rain, rustling foliage, and distant calls create a chilling reminder that humanity's dominance is temporary. The film's handling of post-colonial dynamics is particularly striking because it avoids falling into the exoticism or tokenism that so many adventure thrillers indulge in. The local guide isn't a mystical trope or a passive observer. He's a complex, active participant in the story with his own goals, history, and skepticism toward the outsiders who have repeatedly disrupted his land. Through his eyes, the audience sees how local knowledge has been dismissed, exploited, and overwritten by militarized science and corporate opportunism. The guide's warnings, often ignored until it's too late, become a subtle commentary on epistemic erasure, where indigenous knowledge systems are sidelined until they become inconveniently correct. But Primitive War doesn't overstate the point. It lets visual juxtapositions do the work. An abandoned research facility overtaken by vines, scattered relics of previous expeditions, and the ritual markings that predate modern claims to the land. All of these speak to the violence of imposed control and the arrogance of treating inhabited landscapes as empty. It's storytelling that acknowledges colonial histories without dragging the pacing into lecture mode. Layered within this is a powerful critique of institutional expendability and the politics of sacrifice. Primitive War repeatedly asks, without ever directly saying it, who gets to decide which lives are worth risking? The tension between field soldiers and distant command centers is palpable, underscored by visuals of conflicting orders, encrypted transmissions, and personal items found in the wreckage of past teams. Some soldiers believe they're protecting humanity, others just want to survive, but all of them eventually realize they've been placed inside a disposable equation. The film pushes viewers to feel that tension viscerally by tying structural critique to individual suffering, scenes of soldiers holding onto letters from home, whispered confessions of doubt during watch shifts, and small rebellions against orders that no longer make moral sense. When characters break protocol or clash with superiors, the conflict becomes more than survival. It's about autonomy within systems designed to deny it. Trauma is another theme treated with unusual sensitivity. Primitive War avoids the sensationalism often associated with high-stakes survival films, instead depicting PTSD and moral injury through quiet, physical beats rather than heavy exposition. A soldier's hand trembles while loading a rifle, another hesitates at the sight of blood, and one silently stares at a patch of jungle as though haunted by something the audience hasn't yet seen. These restrained choices carry more weight than dialogue ever could, showing how violence leaves residues on the body long before it can be processed mentally. Masculinity, too, is deconstructed. While some characters cling to outdated ideals of dominance and control, others begin to unravel, revealing vulnerability, fear, and grief that destabilize their roles as instruments of command. The film never mocks them for this, but instead frames these breakdowns as inevitable outcomes of systems that demand obedience while stripping away personhood. Another fascinating layer lies in the commentary on erasure and historical memory. Primitive War leans heavily into visual storytelling to suggest that what's happening in this isolated valley isn't unique, but part of a long pattern of buried incidents and sanitized narratives. Redacted reports, lost film reels, and altered archival footage suggest decades of hidden operations designed to protect reputations rather than truth. The ending compounds this, refusing resolution and leaving space for uncertainty. The surviving characters aren't given debriefs, the incident is likely scrubbed from official history, and the audience is left questioning how many similar events might have been erased. Rather than offering closure, the film embraces ambiguity, inviting viewers to sit with unease and distrust official narratives. What makes Primitive War's social and cultural commentary so compelling is that it trusts the audience to engage with complexity instead of spoon-feeding conclusions. Primitive War doesn't just entertain, it immerses, grips, and lingers in a way few films manage, pulling the audience into an experience where emotional and sensory engagement collide. It builds its audience connection deliberately, weaving an emotional rhythm designed to make you laugh, tense up, gasp, and even sit in stunned silence. From the very first act, the film engineers an atmosphere where anticipation itself becomes its own form of entertainment. The opening trek through dense, fog-choked jungles isn't just a setup. It's a psychological invitation, drawing viewers into the paranoia, uncertainty, and claustrophobia the soldiers feel. The camera often holds just a second longer than expected on rustling leaves or shifting shadows, forcing audiences to lean forward, hearts beating slightly faster, sensing danger before they ever see it. That tension, slow and tightening, becomes an addictive cycle of build-up and release that keeps viewers deeply locked into the film's tempo. But audience engagement in Primitive War goes far beyond cheap thrills. The film taps into something primal, the instinctive human reaction to survival. When the first ambush detonates, with flares exploding overhead and the darkness cut by brief glimpses of scaled bodies darting between trees, the collective gasp in theaters is almost audible. This isn't action for action's sake. The chaos is disorienting, immersive, and designed to make viewers feel as though they, too, are inside that jungle, scrambling for cover. In later sequences, such as the now iconic night siege, where muzzle flashes briefly illuminate desperate faces and fragmented screams, the audience is thrust into a raw, unbroken moment of pure panic. These adrenaline-fueled set pieces force visceral participation, and the editing enhances it by withholding traditional visual clarity, letting sound and fleeting glimpses carry terror, making audiences strain their senses as much as the characters do. Then, almost mercilessly, the film slows down and turns inward, offering rare quiet scenes that become just as gripping as the chaos. Around a dimly lit campfire, soldiers whisper confessions, swap stories, or pass around battered letters from home. A new recruit, still trembling from his first encounter, silently folds a blood-soaked photograph back into his pocket, and the camera stays on him just long enough for audiences to feel the weight of his grief. These quiet moments hit hard because they create real emotional investment. By the time danger strikes again, it's not nameless characters under threat anymore. It's people the audience feels they know, people they care about, and the stakes escalate tenfold. Laughter, when it comes, feels like oxygen after being underwater too long. The humor isn't written to undercut the gravity of the film. It comes naturally, arising from soldier camaraderie and shared exhaustion. A sarcastic jab muttered after surviving an ambush, a half-smile exchanged between characters who narrowly escaped disaster, a bit of dark wit tossed out while dragging a wounded comrade through mud. These moments of levity land with surprising strength because they're earned. The audience laughs not because the script forces it, but because it reflects the very real absurdity of danger and survival, making the humor an emotional release valve that bonds viewers to the characters even more. One of Primitive War's greatest strengths lies in how it plays with audience expectations, engineering surprise not by cheap jumps, but through anticipation and restraint. Silence becomes one of its most powerful tools. There are entire stretches where all you hear is distant insect hum, rustling leaves, the slow crunch of boots through damp soil, and then nothing. That lack of sound creates an unbearable tension where the audience holds its breath with the characters, waiting for the inevitable. When the eventual burst of violence or chaos arrives, it lands like a physical impact. But the reverse is just as effective. The film sometimes teases a looming attack, lets you brace for it, and then nothing happens. This constant unpredictability forces viewers to stay actively engaged rather than passively watching, always questioning where the next threat will come from. Yet the emotional engagement doesn't stop when the credits roll. It extends beyond the theater. Audiences walk out buzzing, replaying scenes, dissecting decisions, and arguing over choices. Who made the right call when things went wrong? Was that morally questionable act justified by survival, or did it cross an ethical line? Was the threat truly external, or was the human conflict the real danger all along? Viewers trade theories about cryptic imagery, like the significance of the stopwatch or the recurring blood-streaked map, and compare interpretations, creating a post-viewing culture around the film that deepens its impact. Online forums and discussion groups thrive because the movie invites analysis without demanding it, meaning casual viewers can enjoy the spectacle, but more invested fans can dive deep into subtext and hidden clues. And then there's rewatch value, which amplifies engagement even further. On a second or third viewing, new layers emerge, background details missed the first time, faint sound cues foreshadowing later reveals, repeated visual motifs buried in the set design. You start noticing how subtle shifts in lighting predict mood changes, how the placement of props quietly ties scenes together, and how dialogue lines that seemed casual early on actually serve as thematic anchors. This layered construction rewards viewers who return, making every rewatch an excavation of deeper meaning rather than a repetition of known beats. What makes Primitive War so special is its ability to engage across multiple audience types simultaneously. Genre enthusiasts are thrilled by the creature choreography and practical effects close-ups. Cinephiles geek out over shot composition, long takes, and color grading. Casual viewers are absorbed by the suspense and raw energy, and critics dissect the socio-political undertones. That breadth creates communal engagement. People who normally watch films in isolation are suddenly swapping theories with strangers, debating narrative intent, and arguing over character arcs both online and in person. The film manages to hit a rare balance between visceral immediacy and long-lasting resonance. It makes you grip your seat when it wants to, makes you laugh when you need release, and makes you ache when it forces you to confront loss. But it also stays with you, subtly gnawing at your thoughts long after. Primitive War doesn't just ask you to watch. It demands participation in feeling, in interpreting, in talking, in coming back for more. Primitive War doesn't just exist in the same cinematic ecosystem as classics like Predator, Aliens, Overlord, The Descent, and Jurassic Park. It actively engages with them, challenging their formulas while borrowing just enough DNA to feel familiar before mutating into something denser, darker, and unexpectedly provocative. At first glance, you might think it's another military team sent into the jungle to deal with a mysterious threat setup, but the way it orchestrates genre influences is more calculated than it appears. Predator might be its most immediate visual cousin, the oppressive humidity, the heat-thick air, soldiers moving in slow, paranoid formation, the audience forced to feel hunted before they even understand what's hunting them. Yet where Predator thrives on sheer machismo, one-liners, and the thrill of a lone apex predator stalking its prey, Primitive War replaces bravado with dread, swagger with silence, and pure spectacle with an undercurrent of moral rot. The enemy here isn't an unknowable alien sporting a trophy case of skulls. It's a consequence of human arrogance, weaponized science, and decisions made in air-conditioned rooms far away from where the blood is spilled. That shift in agency, from alien to human-made chaos, grounds the horror differently, giving every roar and ambush a political weight Predator avoids. Compared to Aliens, Primitive War operates on a similar knife's edge of tension, pacing, and ensemble stress, but it sidesteps the James Cameron approach of escalating toward a cathartic power fantasy climax. There's no Ripley grabbing a flamethrower for a cinematic hero's victory lap. Instead, the soldiers are systematically deconstructed, one by one, stripped of command structures and forced into improvisation. It has the tightly choreographed military tactics, yes, but Primitive War treats those tactics as fragile. Plans dissolve, authority breaks down, and the film thrives in those breakdowns. Where Aliens thrives on adrenaline and scale, this one leans into disorientation and control collapsing under pressure, trading blockbuster clarity for a creeping sense of inevitability. Overlord, its wartime horror sibling, is maybe its closest tonal relative. Both have clandestine operations, biological experiments gone wrong, and a narrative tension between scientific curiosity and human suffering. But where Overlord leans into pulp aesthetics and high-octane gore, Primitive War is more deliberate, even methodical, about its violence. It gives the terror room to breathe rather than spraying it across the screen, allowing moments of quiet before the ruptures hit. It's more haunted than it is hyper, and that restraint makes its shocks sharper when they arrive. If Overlord is a wild, genre-bending roller coaster, Primitive War is the slower-burning descent into the underworld, where dread pools rather than explodes. The descent's influence echoes in the interpersonal dynamics, a tightly contained group, relationships already strained, trust eroding with each new reveal. But while the descent traps you in literal caves, Primitive War does it psychologically. The jungle isn't walls of stone here. It's infinite, sprawling, alive, but somehow claustrophobic because the soldiers never know where danger begins or ends. That tonal dissonance, the openness of the environment paired with suffocating tension, feels like a direct evolution of the descent's ethos, reframed through military command structures. And unlike the descent, where the threat is primal and unknowable, Primitive War forces you to contend with the fact that every monster in this jungle has a signature sign somewhere in a lab, every nightmare was funded, and every casualty was calculated. Then there's The Thing, John Carpenter's paranoia masterpiece, and you can feel its shadow in the DNA of Primitive War's second act, where suspicion spreads among the squad like wildfire. Trust becomes currency. Orders lose weight. Allegiances splinter in real time. But unlike The Thing, which thrives in icy isolation and body horror ambiguity, this film externalizes its terror. It's not just who's infected, it's who knew, who's complicit, who's expendable. That turns the paranoia political, which gives the whole narrative an extra layer of bite. Where The Thing collapses into existential dread, Primitive War channels its paranoia outward into systems of control and exploitation. Kong, Skull Island and Jurassic Park provide the closest blockbuster comparison points in terms of scale and prehistoric spectacle, but here's where Primitive War diverges most sharply from mainstream creature features. Skull Island plays its colossi for sheer awe and bombast. Jurassic Park delivers high-concept thrills wrapped around philosophical questions about science and power. Primitive War borrows the grandeur, but resists clean moral framing or glossy CGI indulgence. Many of its most memorable set pieces lean on practical effects blended with restrained digital enhancement, keeping creature encounters tactile and terrifying instead of weightless or cartoonishly cinematic. The jungle feels alive not just because of what's lurking in it, but because the film refuses to overshow, forcing the viewer's imagination to work overtime, which builds a quieter, longer-lasting tension. If you trace its visual and narrative DNA back far enough, Primitive War feels like an unholy triangulation: the sweaty immediacy of Predator, the corporate military critique of Aliens, and the paranoia of The Thing, layered with the cultural and ecological unease of Annihilation. But it avoids becoming a derivative remix because of how it weaponizes subversion, denying catharsis when you expect it, destabilizing familiar structures like the invincible soldier or the untouchable command, and using silences, lingering shots, and unexpected reversals to make you doubt everything you know about the genre. Where Predator delivers a clean mano-a-mano climax and Jurassic Park resets its moral stakes neatly, Primitive War leaves its ending jagged, unresolved, and buzzing with the implications of everything that was unleashed and everything still being hidden. Even when it does dip into cliché, mission briefings with redacted files, morally ambiguous scientists, the inevitable one last stand sequence, it bends those beats just enough to make them feel new. The Indigenous Guide isn't a mystic cipher. They're given agency and voice. The soldiers aren't bulletproof caricatures. They're fragile, layered, and flawed, their authority constantly challenged by the living environment around them. And while its ancestors built spectacle to entertain, primitive war builds it to interrogate. Why we extract, why we experiment, why we destroy, and who pays for those decisions when it all collapses. In short, primitive war doesn't just stand next to Predator, Aliens, Overlord, The Descent, or Jurassic Park. It's in conversation with them. It takes the familiar military creature horror blueprint and redraws the edges, stitching together a moodier, more ethically tangled narrative without sacrificing genre thrills. It's the kind of movie that rewards you for recognizing its influences, but refuses to let you settle into them, making it feel less like homage and more like evolution, something leaner, meaner, and stranger, built to leave your pulse racing and your brain buzzing long after the credits roll. Primitive War operates like a cinematic puzzle box where every image, sound, and object carries layered meaning beneath its surface narrative. It doesn't just show you events, it encodes them through visual and sonic metaphors, transforming the film into an ongoing conversation between what you see, what you hear, and what remains deliberately unsaid. The deeper you dig, the more the symbols align into a haunting commentary on nature, control, trauma, and memory, creating a multi-dimensional storytelling experience where the literal and the metaphorical bleed together seamlessly. The jungle itself is the central metaphor, a living entity that embodies both history and inevitability. Its overwhelming density, vastness, and silence don't just act as background. They operate as a character with its own perspective. The choking humidity, the shifting greens, and the wet, organic stillness symbolize forces beyond human control, suggesting that humanity's attempts to impose order through science, militarization, or technology are ultimately temporary intrusions into something older and infinitely more powerful. Whenever the film cuts from the oppressive wilds to the lab's sterile halls, the contrast becomes ideological rather than aesthetic. One is the chaos of time layered over millennia, the other is human arrogance attempting to slice, measure, and contain. The jungle wins visually every time. Light barely pierces the canopy, fog eats definition, and the constant sense of being surrounded emphasizes themes of entrapment and insignificance. Recurring props act like narrative anchors, weaving meaning across multiple storylines. A stopped wristwatch appears again and again, shifting hands between characters, marking ruptures in chronology, a symbolic reminder that personal timelines fracture in the face of larger historical forces. A battered compass becomes a metaphor for lost bearings, both literal and moral, while maps, smudged, torn, and stained, are rendered useless, their crisp geometric designs collapsing under the weight of reality. Dog tags, blood-streaked photographs, and personal trinkets act like narrative fossils, each carrying the residue of untold backstories while collectively emphasizing a larger theme: individuality erased by systemic decision-making. The effect is cumulative. The more the camera lingers on these objects, the more the viewer begins to decode the unspoken connections between personal loss, institutional power, and collective trauma. Water and reflection imagery also carry profound symbolic weight. Still rivers, framed like liquid mirrors, suggest memory, tranquil surfaces that conceal violence beneath. Ripples spreading outward often precede revelations, as though the unseen is disturbing reality from below. Rain, on the other hand, functions as cinematic cleansing and drowning simultaneously, washing away evidence while intensifying the oppressive atmosphere. Fire imagery operates as its thematic counterpoint, representing both illumination and erasure. Flares expose buried truths while lab documents burn into ash, a visual metaphor for deliberate historical rewriting. In this interplay of water and fire, survival and destruction, the film encodes one of its central ideas: control is always fleeting, but erasure is often intentional. Sound becomes its own symbolic language. The low-frequency rumble tied to the predators isn't just a creature effect. It's designed to be felt rather than heard, forcing a physical reaction that mirrors trauma embedded deep in the body. These vibrations act like suppressed memory surfacing, bypassing the rational mind to unsettle on an instinctive level. In contrast, the lab sequences use cold, mechanical synth tones, clean, precise, unfeeling, that represent institutional detachment. When these two sonic worlds collide, the overlap creates deliberate dissonance, symbolizing the thematic clash between organic chaos and synthetic control. Even silence carries meaning. In several key sequences, the sudden absence of sound functions as an auditory metaphor for suppression, institutional redaction, and the refusal to confront uncomfortable truths. The cinematography itself reinforces symbolic frameworks. In early scenes, symmetrical compositions and wide, controlled frames suggest authority, command, and human dominance. But as the story unfolds, framing fractures, Dutch angles, erratic handheld sequences, and increasingly claustrophobic shots trap characters in their environments, visualizing their psychological unraveling and the breakdown of imposed order. The camera often pulls back at unexpected moments, dwarfing human figures against vast jungle expanses or colossal ruins, transforming characters into visual metaphors for insignificance in the face of time and nature's permanence. Color grading operates like a thematic dialect. The lab's pale blues and bleached whites symbolize cold sterility and detached rationalism, while the jungle scenes lean into deep ochres, mossy greens, and earthy shadows that evoke decay and timelessness. What's fascinating is how these palettes begin to bleed into each other as the narrative escalates. Sterile blues wash into greens during containment breaches, lab whites stain into crimson during violence, and jungle tones adopt metallic hues when technology intrudes. This gradual chromatic fusion reflects the dissolution of boundaries, science infecting nature, nature corrupting science, and moral clarity dissolving into ambiguity. The creatures themselves are constructed as layered metaphors rather than mere threats. They're designed to unsettle not just because of their appearance, but because they embody consequences. The reckless manipulation of ecosystems, the arrogance of playing God, and the exploitation of environments we never fully understood. Symbolism extends into dialogue and repetition. Lines spoken casually early on recur later with altered weight, turning jokes into accusations or reassurances into curses. A soldier's whispered, "It's under control," at the beginning becomes bitter irony after chaos unfolds, while fragments of scientific jargon echo back during climactic moments, reframing technical language as moral indictment. These verbal echoes mirror the film's visual motifs, creating a layered experience where meaning builds through accumulation and mutation. Primitive War also uses absence as metaphor. The choice not to show certain attacks or to leave entire events implied forces viewers into complicity. We imagine the unseen, constructing horrors based on incomplete information, mirroring the way institutional narratives leave voids in history. The missing footage, the burned records, and the fragmented testimony are not gaps in the film's storytelling but active commentary on censorship and the unreliability of official accounts. By the time the film closes, the surviving artifacts, destroyed files, scorched reels, and reluctant witnesses collectively become its most potent metaphor, history as an unstable construct. What remains documented is partial, compromised, and sanitized, while what survives privately in memory carries the raw, unresolved truths. Primitive War transforms its symbols into active participants in the narrative, inviting viewers to read beyond surface events and engage with deeper currents of meaning, leaving behind an experience where the imagery lingers and the unanswered questions resonate long after the final frame. Primitive War sits in a curious narrative space where franchise potential and historical grounding rub up against each other. And whether you treat it as the opening volume of a series or a standalone speculative thriller changes how you read every production choice. If treated as part of a franchise, the film functions like a dense origin chapter. It seeds a specific how and why, classified de-extinction experiments, Cold War contractors, buried field reports, while intentionally leaving threads untied so sequels, prequels, or spin-offs can expand the scope. Think origin stories that trace the program's funding and the first ethical compromises. Mid-series installments that turn the danger global and political, and anthology branches that follow different teams, locales, or the corporate/legal fallout. As a franchise starter, it benefits from the grounded, tactile world building already visible on screen. The ruined labs, redacted files, Surviving witnesses and local lore are natural hooks for serialized storytelling. A spin-off series could follow investigative journalists, a government probe, or a refugee network carrying the secret history, while transmedia extensions, podcasts of found footage, in-universe documents, or a companion investigative docuseries would let the moral and political questions outgrow pure spectacle and force audiences to engage with the implications the film toys with. Franchise-wise, the safest path creatively is to preserve the original's moral ambiguity rather than turning future entries into action comfort food. The most interesting expansions would double down on institutional culpability and the human cost rather than merely escalating creature set pieces. If instead Primitive War is read as a historical film anchored in a real conflict era, it gestures toward a Vietnam-era 1968 operational context. Its success depends on two parallel things: immersive period detail and an honest admission of artistic license. Immersion shows up in props, uniforms, radios, doctrine, and the texture of daily life in the field. Authentic small touches, accurate radio procedures, believable unit designations, period-appropriate slang, real-looking field gear aged by weather, believable logistics and supply problems, sell a historical setting quickly, and help viewers accept genre elements as plausible intrusions. The production design and sound world do heavy lifting here. Mud, static, sweat, ration tins, and the smell of rain's cinematic shorthand put the audience in time and place, while the film's occasional archival inserts or redacted memos create an illusion of documentation that further roots the story. But genre needs drive liberties. Timelines get compressed, command decisions are dramatized for emotional clarity, and classified programs are often simplified into single, lab locations for narrative focus. A historically sensitive treatment will highlight how the film balances realism with fiction, where it leans into period authenticity, blocking, tactics, the ethical climate of covert Cold War research, and where it deliberately divorces fact from narrative necessity, the biology and technology of the experiments, the scale of secrecy, or the degree to which real-world militaries would sanction certain actions. There's also responsibility in representation. The film's depiction of local populations, rituals, and knowledge systems needs care to avoid tokenism, and a historically minded production often brings on consultants, veterans, historians, anthropologists to keep the texture believable and the cultural elements respectful. Whether franchise or historical piece, the film's role in a larger cultural conversation matters. As an episode in a longer saga, it can unpack the military-industrial dynamics that produce the crisis. As an isolated, historical-flavored thriller, it asks viewers to hold fiction and fact in separate hands, to enjoy the spectacle while recognizing where the story invents to interrogate modern parallels. Biotech ethics, secrecy, exploitation. The film's choices also shape how future entries should behave. Sequels that pursue global contagion introduce geopolitical complexity, international agencies, cover-ups, corporate liability. Prequels that trace the science risk turning moral mystery into exposition unless they preserve ambiguity, and serialized TV or limited series forms can better dwell on character aftermath, legal fallout, and community impact, territory a single movie can only gesture toward. Importantly, franchise expansion carries ethical risks. Turning trauma and historical backdrops into repetitive spectacle can flatten the initial film's poignant critiques, and commercial pressures may pressure creators to favor bigger monsters over harder questions. In any extension, it's vital to keep the original's strongest elements, its tactile production design, moral ambivalence, and cultural texture, at the center so future stories don't dilute them. On the flip side, a responsible historical reading must resist conflating cinematic fiction with documentary truth. The film's dramatized incidents should be contextualized as speculative, and audiences encouraged to separate the narrative's invented conspiracies from verified historical record. Practically, whether as franchise seed or period set standalone, Primitive War is primed to contribute to an overarching narrative that interrogates institutional accountability, environmental hubris, and the human cost of experimentation. Its world-building offers franchise-friendly artifacts, survivors, files, ruined labs, and historically believable scaffolding. But every new chapter that follows should be mindful of not smoothing moral complexity into simple spectacle, preserving the ambiguity and cultural sensitivity that make the initial film compelling. Budget and box office for a film like Primitive War are a study in trade-offs. Production choices, practical effects, location shoots, large VFX sequences push the budget up, but those same choices usually boost perceived production quality and audience goodwill, which can translate into stronger word-of-mouth and bigger international legs. To make this concrete, it helps to think in scenarios rather than a single "was it a success" stamp, because profitability depends on three big levers: the production budget, the P/A prints and advertising spend, and how the theatrical split breaks down between distributors and cinemas. Here are practical, realistic examples you can use to judge outcomes. Example A. Modest/efficient production. Production budget $25,000,000 plus conservative P/A equal to 50% of production. $12,500,000 gives total cost $37,500,000. The theatrical break-even using a simple rule of thumb: studio/distributor keeps /50% of worldwide box office, is total cost divided by 0.5 equals $37,500,000 divided by 0.5 equals $75,000,000 worldwide gross required to break even. Example B. Mid-level production. A reasonable baseline for a well-made creature war hybrid production $$80,000,000 with P/A at 50%, $40,000,000, total investment $120,000,000. Break-even under the same distributor share assumption is $120,000,000 divided by 0.5 equals $240,000,000 worldwide. Example C. Big scale production. Production $$150,000,000 with P/A at 50%, $75,000,000, total $225,000,000. Break-even is almost equal to $225,000,000 divided by 0.5 equals $450,000,000 worldwide. Those simple calculations show why mid to high budgets are risky. The box office targets climb quickly once marketing is added and you account for the exhibitor split. Marketing matters as much as production quality. If Primitive War is marketed cleverly, sharp trailers, festival buzz, targeted genre outreach, strong social assets showing practical effects and practical stunt highlights, it compresses the time to peak and raises opening weekend grosses. That's crucial, because strong openings and good retention week to week lower the absolute box office total you need to be profitable in practical terms. Conversely, a muddled marketing campaign, confusing trailers, bad release window, or leaking too much of the creature design early can kill curiosity and doom even a high-quality film. International markets and ancillary revenue change the picture dramatically. Genre pictures with spectacle often do 60% or more of their business overseas. That means a mid-budget film that underperforms domestically can still clear break-even on a strong international run. Also remember the post-theatrical revenue streams: streaming/licensing fees, transactional VOD, physical and digital sales, TV deals, airline/secondary window licensing, and long-term library value. A conservative studio deal for streaming rights can deliver tens of millions that reduce the theatrical break-even pressure. For instance, a $30, 60M window licensing deal substantially lowers the theatrical glass ceiling. Word of mouth and critical shape. If critics praise the tactile creature work, practical effects, and strong ensemble performances this film favors, and audiences give it a high cinema score/positive social reaction, the legs lengthen. Lower drop percentages mean the film earns more in its 2 ND/3 RD weekends, and that compounds. Conversely, if word-of-mouth flags, poor pacing, muddled tone, or perceived narrative thinness, front-loaded grosses evaporate, and the film will likely finish below theatrical break-even despite good craft. A few practical what-if outcomes tied to the earlier scenarios. If the mid-budget example, total cost $120M, grosses $350M worldwide, distributor take is almost equal to $175M, 50% of $350M. So, theatrical profit before ancillary equals $175M minus $120M equals $55M. Add streaming/license and long-tail revenues, and the picture becomes comfortably profitable. If the same film only reaches $140M worldwide, distributor receipts is almost equal to $70M, and theatrical loses would be about $50M before ancillary, which can be mitigated but still looks like a box office disappointment. Other business levers to watch, and which producers should optimize control cast salary tiers. Big names help opening weekend but spike costs. Favor practical effects where possible. Good for audience love and press, and can be cost-efficient versus endless CGI. Pick tax incentive-friendly shooting locations, and front-load marketing to the week before release to convert curiosity into tickets. Release timing is a strategic decision too. Avoiding blockbuster competition and choosing a weekend where genre audiences are available, late summer or early fall for horror/action hybrids, will help. Finally, the non-theatrical life cycle can change everything. Strong streaming licensing, successful international windows, and franchise potential, sequels, spin-off shows, branded podcasts, or companion docu can turn a modest theatrical showing into a long-term win. So the takeaway, without slapping a single verdict on Primitive War, is this: production quality, practical effects, strong cinematography, location texture, raises the ceiling for critical reception and international interest, but profitability is still a math problem driven by production plus P backslash and a versus box office splits, and the difference between hit and miss often comes down to marketing clarity, release timing, audience word of mouth, and the size of ancillary deals. If you want, I can run more precise payoff scenarios using a specific production budget, a marketing range, and target grosses, domestic versus international splits, so you can see exact break-even and profit numbers for those inputs. If you're planning to dive into this film, the very first decision is simple but critical. Do you want to experience it in its full, unfiltered, big screen intensity, or settle for the comfort of streaming at home? This is the kind of movie where the format changes the experience entirely. In theaters, the sound design wraps around you. The bass drops hit like a shockwave, and the visual scale stretches beyond what your living room can deliver. Those wide, sweeping shots of desolate landscapes, chaotic battles, or intricately crafted environments were designed for a towering screen where every detail is visible and every sound reverberates. Watching it in Dolby Cinema or IMAX elevates everything: the subtlety of the lighting, the weight of the score, and the immersive depth of the VFX. If the film uses layered surround sound, spatial audio, and high-resolution cinematography, a theater is where its world-building truly comes alive. But not everyone has the time or inclination to plan a theatrical outing, and here's where streaming and digital rentals enter the picture. Once the movie exits its exclusive theatrical window, it typically lands on premium streaming platforms first, the early access phase where you can rent or buy it digitally. This period is often priced higher, but offers you the flexibility of experiencing it on your terms without waiting months. If you have a home theater setup, even just a decent soundbar and a 4K TV, this option gets close to recreating the theatrical experience while giving you control over the pace. You can pause during the tense sequences, rewind to catch the hidden visual details, or slow down a big moment to study its practical effects and CGI blend. As the streaming cycle continues, it eventually lands on subscription platforms: Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, Hulu, or whichever service wins the licensing deal. That's when the widest audience comes in, and this is where the conversations around the movie often explode online. Suddenly, social media is flooded with people dissecting character arcs, favorite scenes, and visual Easter eggs. This stage also boosts rewatchability because you're no longer committing to a premium ticket or a rental price. You can revisit the film to catch the subtle foreshadowing and layered metaphors you missed the first time. But there's another dimension audiences often overlook: the collective energy of seeing a film with strangers. In theaters, a shocking twist lands differently when the entire room gasps at once. Laughter spreads like wildfire during comedic beats, and emotional climaxes hit harder when everyone around you shares the silence. It turns passive watching into an event. Streaming, by contrast, is more introspective. It gives you time to process, analyze, and revisit themes without distraction, but you sacrifice that communal rush. For the fullest impact, a hybrid approach works best. Start in theaters for the visceral immersion, the heart-pounding sound mix, the rich production design in widescreen, and the uninterrupted focus. Then, revisit it later on streaming to unpack its deeper meanings, notice hidden symbolism, and engage with online discussions dissecting every frame. That's where the film reveals its layers. You move from being overwhelmed by the sensory experience to appreciating the craftsmanship behind it. Timing also matters depending on how patient you are. If you want to be part of the cultural moment, joining early debates, avoiding spoilers, and catching the raw, unfiltered reactions, watching it in its theatrical run is your safest bet. If you prefer a slower approach where you can binge analyses, read breakdowns, and process the narrative at your own pace, waiting for its streaming debut is the smarter choice. And for collectors or cinephiles, the Blu-ray or 4K Ultra HD release often brings another advantage: behind-the-scenes documentaries, directors' commentaries, deleted sequences, and high-fidelity transfers that preserve details theaters sometimes lose. That's where you uncover the craftsmanship in every frame, from set design to CGI layering. Ultimately, how you watch defines what you take from the experience. On the big screen, the film overwhelms your senses. At home, it invites reflection. But if you want to capture both the adrenaline and the artistry, catching it in theaters first and revisiting it digitally later delivers the richest, most rewarding journey. If you want, I can break down the likely release timeline, theatrical window, premium on-demand dates, subscription streaming arrival, and Blu-ray launch, so you know exactly when and where to catch it at each stage for maximum impact. Would you like me to map out that full viewing roadmap?